Oh, yes.
Welcome back, everyone. Today I'm very excited to bring you a review for the new Transformers War for Cybertron Kingdom Leader Class Ultra Magnus. This new Ultra Magnus is a significant retool of the Transformers Siege Magnus, and he's been given new details to put him more in line with his Earth-based vehicle mode, as well as his G1 cartoon appearance for the robot mode. As such, this toy kind of cuts a compromise between the Siege design and the G1 design, leading to some things that are good, some things that are really not great. And we'll definitely get into those. And basically gives you a toy that may or may not be the Magnus for you. It's worth pointing out that this new figure is part of the second wave of Leader Class figures, along with a repacked Beast Megatron. So if you didn't get Megatron the first time around, you get another chance. And he is officially number 20 in the Kingdom line. So if you've seen my reviews before, you know how this goes. We're going to take a look at Magnus's packaging. Then we'll open it up. We'll see his instructions. We'll see the Fate Reveal card, which is hopefully something new. And then we'll see Magnus himself in his vehicle mode, inner robot mode, armored robot mode. We're doing plenty of comparisons with different Ultra Magnuses, his mold mates. It's going to be a bit of a longer one because, you know, he's a big, complicated toy and is worthy of such a review. And then, of course, at the end of the video, I'll give my final thoughts. So Ultra Magnus comes in your standard Leader Class packaging for Kingdom. You get a little half window here where you can see most of his upper body and all that. Showing off some of the new tooling already. Along the front and the side, you get his artwork, which shows his vehicle mode on the front. And already gives some details as to what's wrong with it. And then you get his very cool robot mode on the side here, pointing heroically like he's leading the charge into battle as the city commander that he is. You can see the arc on top of a volcano, which is apparently erupting. Turn to the back here, and you get the renders for the vehicle mode, the smaller vehicle mode, smaller robot mode, and then armored up robot mode. And they get really thorough here. So it takes 16 steps to transform from apparently big vehicle to small vehicle. I guess? I don't know. I mean, you're really just removing the trailer, but okay. 12 steps to transform to the smaller robot mode, and then another 21 to go to his more familiar armored mode. So they're doing a good job of showing off everything here. And then if we go ahead, turn this to the side, get a nice big shot of the Kingdom side panel, which, again, I'm a huge fan of. I think it's my favorite of the trilogy. And on the top, you just get your cave painting Autobot symbol. You can see a big gash right across the top of mine where it looks like the Walmart employee got a little overzealous with a box cutter. Luckily, not a new in-box collector, so, you know, it's okay. So, yeah, that is the packaging for Magnus, and it's very visually impressive. I like the way it came out. It really just embodies that Beast Wars /86 movie theme of Kingdom. So hopefully what's inside is just as exciting. Alright, well, my Fate card was yet another Dark Arc card, so... oh well. Won't be looking at that one. I'm up to like 3 or 4 of those now. It's getting ridiculous. Alright, so here's instructions for Magnus. Open this up. A little how-to on where to attach his accessories. And then the transformation to remove his armor, place him in his smaller core robot mode. And then the transformation from core robot to truck cab. The big old hands sticking off the back. And then, lastly, your transformation for the armor to become the truck trailer. And then attach it to the cab. And you get this completed thing here with all the weapons attached. Now, personally... they kind of do what the Siege Magnus does and has you attach his, like, shoulder missiles or, you know, truck missile launchers all the way back here on the back of the trailer. Personally, I would attach them here toward the front to make it more accurate to what's supposed to be a G1 Earth-based Magnus. You can do what you want, but I think that was just kind of an oversight on their part. Another thing worth pointing out is here, it has you attach his shoulder pylon things upside down with the hollow bits facing up. I personally am going to attach them with the actual textured side facing up because I think it looks more complete that way. Again, up to you. I think it's just an oversight in the instructions, personally, because I don't know why you'd want to display it like that with a bunch of hollow parts. And now here is Magnus himself in his vehicle mode. And the first thing I notice, aside from, the obvious retooling, is just how clean looking this guy is. He has a very, very bright white cab as opposed to kind of the dingier white used by the Siege versions. And it really helps him pop as something that's supposed to invoke his cartoon appearance. So I do appreciate that. I like the nice bright whites on these Earthrise toys, or in this case, Kingdom toys. They give them this dirtier color. It makes your toy look like it's been sun bleached. Like you left it in front of a window for a few years and, you got like a Beast Wars Cybertron situation on your hands. So I do appreciate this. And hopefully these don't fade over time. It's really nice. Very eye-catching. All right, so now you can see the trailer sits way further back than it did on the Siege version, which creates a problem. And it's something that really bothers me. So the Siege Magnus cab had a huge flaw in that his robot arms and hands just hung off the back of the cab. Now, in his full vehicle mode, it wasn't a huge issue because the trailer kind of came all the way up here. Like this bit reached all the way to the smokestacks. And it just wasn't as noticeable, right? It kind of hid that away. So if you consider that his true vehicle mode, it was a little more forgivable. Here, what is supposed to be a Generation 1 Magnus has this hanging off the back, and that just really kills me. I'm kind of glad they made this more G1 accurate by moving the trailer back, but now you got this problem. Now, this is purely a rumor, but somebody who purports to have worked for Hasbro, they claim that originally Kingdom Magnus was actually going to be a white redeco of Earthrise Optimus Prime, the cab part, given a whole new trailer and all new armor to attach to him to create like a proper G1 Magnus update. Again, this is a rumor. The person can't really confirm any of this because then they'd kind of out themselves and probably get in trouble with Hasbro. But yeah, if that was the case, that would be infinitely preferable to what we're getting right now, because in doing this retooling, it highlights all the weakness of the Siege Magnus mold and then removes a lot of its strengths as well. Like Siege Magnus worked because he wasn't exactly G1 Ultra Magnus, so he was able to take some liberties, right? He was like a hybrid of Generation 1 and Robots in Disguise Magnus. Now what we get is just something that's really neither, right? Like, it's not the Siege one and it's not G1. It's like something that got caught halfway in between. So, yeah. I think that if that rumor is true, it was a huge, huge loss for us, the collectors, the fans, the kids, whoever buys this thing. And it's definitely going to leave people clamoring for like an even more accurate G1 Magnus, because again, they're just not getting what they were really hoping for. All right, but negative part aside, looking at what we do get here, there's a lot of retooling. This whole front area of the cab is redone, like this whole windshield area, which is like the robot chest. The grill area is all new. Even this piece right here that forms this like wheel well behind the grill area is a new piece, which is great because it helps fill out the big gap that was on Siege Magnus, so that's cool. You also notice that all of his tires are different. They're less alien looking than the Siege one. It's got the new missile launchers here. The trailer is mostly the same. Like all this is the same. These end panels for the sides, this one and this one, are new panels. The rest are all taken from Siege. The chest bits are different. Make them more G1 cartoon accurate. And then the shoulder pylons that you'll be able to see a little better here shortly are completely redone to look more like the cartoon. Gun's the same. So there's a lot changed, there's a lot left the same. It's one of those things where what was changed is impressive, but then it also just highlights what wasn't changed and probably really needed to be. So just kind of a quick analysis of that. Here's a comparison with the original version of this mold. We have Siege Ultra Magnus here. And you can see right away the biggest difference that you'll spot is the cab section, right? all very different. Here's a difference in white coloring I told you about too. This is much more, I don't know, dinged looking or kind of dirty. You do lose 2 accessories with this version. You don't get the big black leg guns and stuff that Siege 1 came with. Now, granted, you know, they would be kind of extraneous to the G1 design because they are meant to homage part of the RID Magnus's vehicle mode as well as Cybertron Optimus Prime's or Galaxy Force Optimus Prime's leg guns. So I get why they'd be extraneous, but now you just have a situation where you just lose 2 accessories worth of value. So you're not getting as much with this new Magnus. You are getting a lesser value, and that's really a shame. You can see the different missile launchers right there. Again, gun's the same, just done up in darker color this time. Trailer's mostly the same, except for those panels on the ends right there. And here's the different wheels. And you can kind of see the shoulder pylons right there. So, again, very different. Oh yeah, and also look how differently they set between the trailer and the cab. See how much further up this is? Yeah, they changed that quite a bit. So, just a good visualization of how different he is from the original version. Here's a quick look at the entire mold family. So from left to right, you have Siege Magnus, Netflix Siege Magnus, who's same sculpt, just more battle damage and stuff. You have Siege Galaxy Force Optimus Prime, who's the heaviest retool of this mold by far, and then our new Earthrise Magnus. So, aside from maybe these two, they're all doing their own thing, and you know, do support a heavy amount of retooling. As much as I harp on the things that they didn't change, it's still pretty impressive to see just how far they went with the tooling in this mold to make each version of it stand out from one another, except for, you know, these two. All right, we're going to zoom out a bit here so we can get a lineup of most of the G1 Ultra Magnus molds that have been released over the years. So you have the original Generation 1 toy here. Technically, it uses the commemorative reissue for the cab, because didn't realize that when they sold it to me. You get the Classics Magnus, which is unfortunately just the cab part. Combiner Wars Ultra Magnus, which is actually more based on the IDW version of Magnus, though his vehicle mode comes closer than pretty much any other in mimicking the original looks of the toy. Then we get the big guy here, which is the Masterpiece Ultra Magnus, who is probably the only one that tops the Combiner Wars toy as far as vehicle mode accuracy. And then you get Siege and Kingdom. So, you know, he's had a pretty consistent look over the years. White cab, big old car carrier trailer. There's only a few times he's really deviated from that approach. And the reason I want to do this lineup is, again, to highlight that for all the retooling they did to bring this guy a little bit closer in line, you can just see that he's still so markedly different looking from something like this or that or this guy. Like, yeah, they included some details on the side to kind of mimic the sides of his trailer, but that's about as far as the resemblance goes. Like, he doesn't function as a car carrier at all. The best thing I'd say they did is just retooling the front of the cab, and that's about the only thing that looks like the classic toy. So, yeah, or the cartoon model for that matter. So yeah, it is disappointing just how much they missed what's basically supposed to be the 86 movie character. I mean, really, when you think about it, that's what Kingdom is, right? It's a celebration of Beast Wars, 1986 Transformers movie. And they've really, really hit out of the park with most of these entries, right? Your Cyclonus, Scourge, the leaked shots of Galvatron we've seen so far, right? Like Hot Rod. They all hit the mark of that accuracy. And then we get, you know, half-hearted attempt Magnus over here, so. Yeah, not a fan of this vehicle mode. All right, let's do a little how-to on removing the Magnus cab from his trailer. So the first thing you want to do, you lift up on this red bit. It's a little different than the Siege one. So you just lift that up, and it just kind of releases these notches here. And then you're just going to untab these clips here carefully. Okay. Just one. Do it in a way where you don't stress the plastic. All right. So here's a big thing that's different with how this connects. All right, it used to be that the shoulder pylons had like little, bigger notches on the top here that would clip into this. So these parts would be, attached to the trailer, and then you'd move all this in. Now these are attached to his feet separately from the rest of the trailer, so these don't actually attach to the rest of him at all. And because of that different connection, the way they move things around, that's why he sits further up. So you get this. If you want to make it kind of nice and neat when you put it away, you can kind of close all this back up on top here. Like so. This gun spins around a little too freely for my liking on this version. Not game breaking, but it's kind of annoying. All right, so you get that. And then you just slide this off like so. Just kind of slides on that little bar there, just like the Siege version. So let's set all of his trailer stuff out of the way. Get rid of that so we can see just the cab itself. And this cab, from the front, looks awesome. Really does. Lots of sculpted detail. Really nice dark silver paint on the grill areas. The edges of the windshields are painted. The windshield wipers are, well, at least the tops of them are painted. The bits down here are still white. You see that? Gets a nice Autobot tampo right here. So the white bumper is not toon accurate. In the cartoon, he actually has a red bumper. So this is actually more accurate to the G1 toy, but I kind of like it more than the red bumper. Red bumper is kind of weird looking. Again, you get those nice wheels. And then in the back is where it all kind of falls apart. Like, from here back is just the Siege toy, more or less. With all this super tech detailing, the robot bits sticking out. Yeah, it's really something that should only be displayed like this. And again, it's a shame. Could have been so much more, but they wanted to cut costs and reuse a mold that wasn't really meant to be what this is. So let's grab our Siege toy. Put these two together again, so you can see. Again, the white, much brighter than the Siege one. Wheels, see how different they are? And then, aside from the new front areas, it's all the same. Look at that. Just as unsightly as the last time. So, while I do think that this works a little better as a standalone truck cab, despite all the garishness in the back. Because this thing, it's supposed to be like a large one-piece truck that doesn't have like a pivoting trailer. So now it just looks like, incomplete. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, neither one is a feat of engineering. Like, there are much better semi-truck-based Transformers out there than these two. So I guess it's really up to you which one you think comes out being a little better looking. Here's another look at the full mold family with just the cab section. This way you can really highlight the difference in the front ends here. And you can see the very sci-fi inspiration for the Siege Magnuses and the Optimus here. Not like anything you'd probably see driving around Earth. So that's easily the biggest difference with this guy compared to them, is just a whole new setting. Then again, from the back, it all ends up being the same. So it's like the Magnus cab just like slapped on a different mask. Like went cosplaying. It's really what it is. Okay, and here's our cab only look back at the Magnuses through the ages. You notice the Combiner Wars toys in here, and that's because his cab can't actually separate from the trailer without removing a screw and like modifying things, so he doesn't count. So we can see as it jumped back and forth between a 1980s cab over engine style truck, much more modern streamlined truck, because the Classics was all about kind of reinventing the classic alt modes. Then you go back to basics with the Masterpiece, really out there with a Cybertronian Japanese-inspired design. And then, again, back to the basics, or, at least for the first third of it, until you just go back to a robot mess. So I would say, at least on the front end, he comes the closest to matching the looks of the original toy. Especially when you consider the longer grill area here, and the fact he doesn't have like a garish red bumper. Though it should be silver, so I guess that's not really more accurate, just differently inaccurate. Okay, now we get a look at our inner robot for Magnus. And I didn't show the transformation because it's exactly the same as the Siege version, so if you need to see that for whatever reason, I would check out the Siege Ultra Magnus review I did way back in, early 2019, I'd say? 2018? I forget. Now, one thing you'll notice is that his colors, his white is getting very washed out by this lighting because that's just how bright white he is. Bring him in closer, you can see the details better. But yeah, looks really cool. Very much, looks like what you'd imagine as the inner robot to the G1 Ultra Magnus. And luckily, as far as tolerances, everything seems to be very spot on. The head, it's like the perfect amount of looseness. Shoulders, arms, all that, wrists, hips, they still click nice and crisply. Like, no issues with this guy at all. So that's good. There's no signs of mold degradation. Very tight little robot mode. So that is a really good thing. I could bring in the Siege toy so you can see how they compare. And the only difference, sculpt-wise, is this whole chest area, and then of course their backpack, which is made up of their vehicle grille. So very similar looking in this mode. I will say, I think because of the tapered shape of the Siege toy, he does have a much more athletic looking physique. He's much less boxy. So that might be something I consider a slight advantage on the Siege toy. His proportions just much more closely match those of what you think of, when you think of Optimus Prime, where his whole grill abs kind of taper in there. This guy really just pulls like a G1 toy, and he's just, a square with limbs and a head, pretty much. So, you might like that, you might not. There are some interesting differences in their paint applications. For one, he's actually missing a paint app on his knee pads. The original toy had silver here. They actually left that out on the new one, so that's kind of a shame. Sports a much bigger Autobot logo, and it lacks the silver border, so it's kind of a trade-off. Their little pelvic area here, it's the same piece and has paint apps in the same area on the front here, but his are done like a light metallic blue. His are done in more of the same blue as the faceplate. And then speaking of the face, mostly the same, aside from the individual specific hues. But you will see that the crest on the old toy is done in blue, whereas his is done in silver, which I kind of like more. I like that it's more broken up and it's not just blue on the helmet there. So, yeah, they both kind of have pros and cons in this particular mode. As far as just what's visually appealing, again, I still just really like the bright whites on this guy. He just pops so much more and doesn't look like just an old beat-up toy like this one does. I mean, Siege characters are supposed to look beat up, so, if that's the aesthetic you want, yeah, but as far as just what pleases the eyes more, I think I'm leaning toward this guy, just by a bit. They're pretty close. Again, another mold family lineup, and just like with the vehicle mode, Optimus comes off looking just the most different at all of them. He's got the whole different cab section, the multi-piece backpack, and he's got a new head as well. Something that's kind of an easy detail to miss, but his head sculpt is actually different than the Magnus's. In fact, it would have been cool to help set this guy further apart from the Siege toy if maybe they used this Optimus head instead of the Magnus one, but not a huge deal. Again, it's one of those things that most people probably don't even notice. And you'll see Optimus gets the new gun too, right? Because he's got a whole different trailer setup and all that. Interestingly, despite the Netflix Magnus having very heavy battle damage paint apps in the form of all this gray, his whites are actually much closer to the Kingdom toy than the Siege's. So that's interesting. You'd think if anything he'd be darker because he's even more dirty and beat up and burnt out, but no. They kind of went back and forth there, so that's interesting. Now another interesting thing is that this Optimus here, he is actually quite loose in his joints. Not so much where he can't pose, but there is significantly less tension in his joints compared to any of the other versions, which is odd, right? You'd think it'd be the most recent toy that has the most mold fatigue or the most, tolerance issues. And in this case, no, it's the second use, right? Because we got this guy, he came out, they went back to this Magnus with Netflix, and now we get a new one in Kingdom. And the only one that really has floppiness is the Optimus. So I don't know if that's just a result of his retooling or what, but yeah, luckily our new toy does not have that issue. So fear not. Here's another Magnus Through the Ages shot. And now we're down to 4, because the Masterpiece doesn't have an inner robot mode, which to this day severely disappoints me, right? It is the Masterpiece Magnus, but they didn't bother giving an inner robot mode, so lame. All right, so what we do have here is G1, Classics, Siege, Kingdom. Now, one of the big things that got people really excited about Siege Ultra Magnus is that it was the first time since Generation 1 that we received an Ultra Magnus toy that had both an inner and outer robot mode, right? It was the whole complete thing. But a lot of people also felt put off because he had, really radical design changes from the G1 design, because he was, a halfway homage between the two of them. With this new toy, we do come the closest we've ever been to a faithful update of the inner robot. You can see the just chest and ab details are really, really similar between these two. And he very much does just evoke the feel of the G1 toy a little better than even the Siege. Not saying that he's more accurate in every way. He actually has certain things about him that make him less accurate than the Siege toy. For one, the Siege's off-white is actually closer to the old Magnus toys, because the old Magnus toy wasn't super bright white either. And you've also got the silver border around his Autobot symbol, the blue head crest. So there is a little bit of a trade-off. Plus his silver knees kind of recreate the sticker decals on the G1 toy. One thing that's interesting is, it might be hard to notice, but both the G1 toy and the War for Cybertron ones, they both use the same rifle between the inner and outer robot modes, but the old toy actually holds his upside down in this mode, compared to how it's held in the armored robot mode. And that's because the two different hands used for him use different peg hole sizes. These hands are actually your standard 5mm holes, so you can fit all sorts of modern accessories in here. This big handle is more of an oblong shape that was specifically designed for the armored robot hands. So a little bit of trivia there. It would have been really cool if they had designed the Siege and Kingdom gun to be held either way, so you could have it flipped over. Like you can see, they have a detail here that actually mimics that extra handle, but it's not really actually usable by the toy. So cool attention to detail. Would have been a little bit cooler if, this had maybe been a 5mm post, or at least something that fit inside a 5mm hole. And now finally, we come to the Super Robot mode. Probably the main selling point for a lot of people picking up this toy. And this mode really highlights the changes that were made to this figure. So you can really see the whole new chest section here. His little pelvic region is actually different. The inner robot half is the same, but the second half is actually a new piece, which is much more accurate to the cartoon. Because again, we're going all cartoon here since War for Cybertron Chapter 2. You get those new missiles. You can see the new shoulder pylons, which look much closer to the original. The new head, whole new head sculpt. Biggest difference, besides smoother surfaces, is that he uses the cartoon's goggle eye look rather than the G1 toy's just standard looking eyes. So that's a big departure from the Siege toy. And then on the back, the new grille becomes a very different looking little butt flap area there. Which, honestly, I think I actually prefer the Siege one a little more. It's a bit more, I don't know, flattering looking than just having this little truck bumper on your butt, but oh well. So overall, I think he's a little bit better looking as far as just overall presentation. There is one thing I do find strange, and you'll notice that the little pegs on the top of his shoulders, which, are nearly identical to those found in the G1 toy, and they also serve as, just universal 5mm posts. So it's great. But you notice they're blue. That's kind of odd, right? Kind of makes them stand out. So a big difference between this and the Siege toy is that his pylons are cast in blue plastic, and then the upper part is painted white. Whereas on the Siege toy, you'll see the pieces are cast in white and then painted blue at the base here. I'm really not sure why that change was made. Right, it's like a one-for-one swap, so you'd think with the mold retooling, these would just go in, the same spot that the old ones did. But For whatever reason, they didn't do that. I imagine there's a logistical reason for it. The downside now is that you do get these little blue nubs on top that just look a little bit off. Minor detail. A lot of people won't even notice or care, but it makes you wonder, right? If they just molded this in white, like they did the Siege toy, you could have avoided that whole thing. Yeah, overall, he looks great. He suffers the same issue that figures like Ironhide from Earthrise do, where it's a Earth mode retool of a Cybertronian version of the character, so you get this weird mismatch of aesthetics, right? The parts that are new, parts that are supposed to be G1 based or Earth based, they're much smoother in comparison, fewer texture lines, and then you get to the pieces that are brought over, like say, the legs, and they're very greebly. They've just got molded details all over them, so there is a bit of a stylistic clash here. It's not as bad on him, I would say, as someone like Ironhide, but it's something that is noticeable. Okay, now we're bringing out the Siege version, and you can see right off the bat, what's the same, what's different. One thing I just noticed, and it kind of carries over from the inner robot mode, is there are slightly less paint apps on the front shins here. Right? They both get the silver kneecaps, but he's got a red square in the middle, and then the Siege toy also gets a silver outline around his red vents, whereas this guy just keeps it white. They also bothered to paint these outer edges of his legs blue, like the side kibble, whereas here they just left it white, so it's a bit of a downgrade. I'm usually for, more detail as opposed to less. But aside from that, you can see the differences here in the shoulders, right? Very different textures, different heights and styles along the top. Pelvic areas are very different looking. Chest areas are completely new pieces. The heads, you can see his head is much more greebly in design. And in fact, I think it may be slightly smaller. And then he's got those regular eyes. And that's really it for molding differences. Of course, the skirt flap things. And again, you are getting the extra accessories with the Siege toy, which I don't know why they didn't include them, other than obviously, cost cutting. But you could have just as easily included them. I mean, people are already kind of annoyed at this halfway attempt at a G1 Magnus. The least you could have done was sweeten the deal with extra guns or something, but I don't know. Hasbro's gonna Hasbro, I guess. So overall, I think I do like the outer robot of the new toy better. Even though he's a little bit lacking in some paint, especially on the legs, he really hits closer to home to me for what I think of when I think of Ultra Magnus. And for this final shot, we get a look at all the different Magnuses in their final armored up super robot mode. And kind of like with the vehicle mode, the designs kind of jump back and forth a bit. So you have your original toy with all his design elements, his colors, specifically a rather light blue that wasn't carried over into the cartoon. You get to your Combiner Wars toy that, despite being based off of a different version of Ultra Magnus, does share a lot of similarities with the original toy. Specifically the light blue coloring, the more triangular chest armor here, and very tall shoulder pylons. Your masterpiece, as most masterpieces do, goes for full cartoon accuracy, and he does succeed in that. His super robot mode, super cartoon accurate. Also huge. And then your Siege one is really interesting because he blends a bit of both styles. His coloring mostly resembles the animation model with the darker blues, but things like his face sculpt, the more triangular shape to the chest armor, the ridged red vents on the shins there, those harken back to the original toy design. So he really mixes both styles quite well. And then when you get to our new Kingdom figure, though it does maintain certain elements like the leg vents that are more toy-based, the changes made to this toy put it much more in line with the final cartoon model, where that's the wider, squatter shoulder pylons, the goggle eyes, the more squared chest area here. The missile shape is much closer to, say this masterpiece than it is the original toy. So when it comes to style, the Magnus design has just kind of jumped back and forth between two depictions over the last, 3 decades. And what we've landed on finally is something that mostly leans toward the animation model, while still picking up some details from the original toy, at least as far as this robot mode is concerned. Then you have to couple in the fact that he has an inner robot mode, so that makes him more like the toy, seeing as the TV show, and honestly, like almost all fiction, never shows Magnus with an inner robot. That puts him in toy territory. But then his vehicle mode is just bizarre because it's trying to be the G1 Magnus vehicle mode, but then it's also halfway the RID Magnus vehicle mode, and it comes out to really a very confusing presentation. So overall, I like this toy. I think the vehicle modes are by far its weakest quality. Honestly, it's not really good. Whether it's just the cab or the combined vehicle, they look very confused and they don't look very convincing as what is, an Earth-based car carrier truck. The robot modes, I think, are stellar, and I prefer them to, varying degrees over the original Siege version. Unfortunately, because they decided to cut costs and just retool the Kingdom toy instead of doing a new mold or doing the Earthrise Prime with a new trailer, this toy really doesn't live up to its full potential as an update of the 1986 movie character. If that's what you want, honestly, the Masterpiece is your best bet if you can afford it. I mean, it was like $180 or so when it came out, and that was years ago. Now, if you're looking on the budget side of things, it's a little trickier because the robot mode, I'd say his Super Robot mode, best depiction of a 1986 Magnus. And, kind of ties with the Siege version for closest design-wise to the original toy. But I can't vouch for the vehicle modes. They're just bad. If anything, if you're looking for a vehicle mode that actually looks like his vehicle mode, you might want to track down the Combiner Wars figure. In fact, a lot of people still swear by this toy, even though we have a Siege and a Kingdom version. And I understand why. It looks very much like the original toy. The transformation is very similar, almost identical to the original toys. The only big difference functionally is that he doesn't have the, core robot cab. Instead, he just gets a little tiny Minimus Ambus that hides inside of his chest. Now, if you don't mind third-party stuff, there is a third-party cab replacement for Combiner Wars Magnus that becomes a transforming inner robot. If you want to go that route. It's probably pretty expensive by now because this toy's old, but if you want, my recommendation for most perfect recreation of the original toy, Combiner Wars Magnus with third-party upgrade. So now getting back to our new guy, though, do I think it's a good toy for what he is? Yeah, he's just what he is in a box, in a vacuum. He's good. He's a lot of fun, even if the vehicle mode, the cab, looks pretty terrible. He's still a very fun toy. The whole armor art gimmick is really great. It works very well. Lots of play value. If you're looking for, your Chug Generation 1 Ultra Magnus, whether or not he's it kind of depends. If you already have the Siege toy, and you're not a super completionist and you just want a G1 Magnus, I would just stick with your Siege toy, because they haven't done enough with this new Kingdom one to set him apart from that to where I really feel that it justifies another $50 purchase. I don't think so. The slight updates they did to make him slightly more, Earth accurate, I don't think it's worth the price of admission if you already went in on Siege. I really don't. If you don't already have the Siege toy and you want a G1 Magnus, then go ahead, pick him up. Even though the vehicle mode's ugly, he serves the purpose pretty well, and he does look good in his robot modes. And, in a display, in robot mode, he'll look really great next to your Kingdom figures, your Studio Series 86 figures. He scales with them pretty well. It's always up for debate just how accurate the scaling is of War for Cybertron, because a little hit or miss. But he scales better than, say the Combiner Wars toy. So, yeah, I wish I could recommend him more highly and more confidently, but it really just comes down to the situation. If you're a completionist, you'll enjoy the little changes they made. I mean, it is kind of cool. that he does have quite a bit setting him apart from the Siege toy. If you're like a one per character collector, he's really only worth it if you don't have the Siege toy. I can't see spending 50 on Siege and then, a year or two later spending another 50 on a toy that's really not doing enough to become the Earth mode Magnus we wanted. So that's my take on it. Do with that what you will. Make your purchases as you see fit. But now that you've heard my opinion, I want to know what you all think of this new Magnus. Are you as disappointed with it as I am, or do you like it more than I can bring myself to? Do you think the guy has more pros than cons, or is the whole Siege retool thing just not doing it for you? Any and all feedback is welcome in that comment section. If you enjoyed this review, make sure to toss it a like. Let YouTube know you want to see more stuff like this. If you do want to see more like this, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you always get a heads up when I post something new. I thank you for joining me for this look at the brand new Transformers War for Cybertron Kingdom Leader Class Ultra Magnus. And with all that said, I will see you next time.